It's really common as a founder to be told that if things aren't working, you should pivot. And frankly, it's like kind of obvious. But the hard part isn't actually making the pivot, isn't making the change. It's realizing whether you should pivot in the first place. Because the reality is, while you're told to, pivot and pivot and pivot, you're also told to never give up. And so how do you find that balance between continuing to push and continuing to power through, to be relentless on the one hand, and on the other hand, realizing, hey, this thing's never going to work. Let's switch it up. And so that's really what we dive into here with this episode. I spoke with Andrew Tai, who's an amazing founder. He started MotoInsight, which was ultimately acquired by Autotrader for tens of millions of dollars. He grew that business to about $20 million in revenue. And the interesting part of his journey was a long journey, 12 years actually in the making. But he started off launching this company called Unhaggle, which was a marketplace. And then he shifted and pivoted into what was ultimately MotoInsight, which was an enterprise software play, both in the auto industry, but obviously quite different. And it took him 3 years. He did the first marketplace for 3 years before deciding and realizing that he should pivot. And so we dive deep into that part. And I think by listening to how Andrew Tai thought about it, it can help you figure out when it might be time to pivot. Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show, brought to you by Mistral, a seed stage firm based in Canada. I'm Pablo. I'm a founder turned VC. My goal is to help early stage founders like you find product market fit. Welcome to the Product Market Fit Show.
Happy to be here. Good to be with you, Pablo.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Andrew. Just for quick background, Andrew is a founder and father of 2 kids now, as I was just chatting with him earlier. And his first startup called MotoInsight was acquired ultimately by Autotrader, the group that runs Autotrader. And it was a pretty long journey, right? It was about a 14-year journey, grew the company well into the 8 figures of ARR. But it started a bit differently, right? Ultimately, the business was around selling software to dealerships, right? Classic B2B SaaS, even more, enterprise type SaaS. It started off as a marketplace. And so today we'll be talking about how to pivot, right? In the journey from and pivoting specifically from a marketplace to B2B SaaS, 2 very different business models, and just walking through how to do that, but also why you did that, because I think that that's where we'll uncover a lot of insights that founders might be able to use. So with that said, let's start at the beginning. How did you come up? What was Unhaggle, actually? Maybe let's start there.
It's funny. I always think about it as, man, that was a long journey. You think you said 14 years. By my count, it's probably like 11 or 12, depending on how you actually count it. So it started really as a marketplace to help consumers find and buy new cars easier, faster, more transparent. There was a bit of a price line, inspiration there where dealers would compete for your business. You can configure the exact car that you were looking for and get local dealers to offer you the best prices on inventory.
What was happening? Maybe just walk us through, because today, the world of car buying, there's just so much innovation happening there. What was live back then? Was Carvana a thing? How big was Autotrader? What were the options really?
The market was way more static back then. This was 2011 when we started. And, as of late, you see all of the big names like the Carvana and the likes that have garnered a lot of attention, both up and down, through the cycle. But in 2011, none of that was reality. It was still very much a classified listings model. So Autotrader was in existence. And I think, back then, Autotrader actually, a component of their business was still printing paper books, like Autotrader books. I remember reading those growing up, right? So this was a very different time. And the concept of bringing the buying experience online was a major step forward in and of itself. But we wanted to really transform the model. Instead of you shopping around and negotiating, to be able to eliminate that and bring transparency in pricing. In addition, the convenience of being able to do much of the transaction at home. And it started as really scratch your own itch kind of moment. I was going through the process of buying a car, and for someone like me that grew up on the internet, the traditional process made very little sense. And the light bulb was just, hey, there's got to be a better way, and technology should be able to help.
Before kind of jumping into the big change and the thing that really worked, let's talk a bit more about what didn't work. What was the original conception, the thing that you saw that was broken in terms of the car buying experience that you desperately wanted to fix?
Yeah, so I think first part of it was just the tremendous inefficiency. Literally driving from one dealership to another dealership to a third dealership and maybe a fourth dealership to literally just ask, hey, what's the price on this vehicle, and then have a bit of a back and forth negotiation. I think we had heard stories of people where they would fax a description of the vehicle that they were looking for and what they were willing to pay, and then see what would come back out to a whole bunch of dealerships, and then email. Some people would do that. Fax machines were actually still a thing with dealerships back in 2011, but that was the first part of it, which was really the inefficiency and the lack of transparency. And I think beyond that was everything was moving online in terms of transactions. And yes, buying a car is more of a complex transaction, but should you be able to do it from the comfort of your own home and through a matter of clicks? Like, I think those are the initial inspirations behind it, and it was an experience that I wish existed. Going through the car buying experience myself.
And what was that 10-star experience? Was it like you go on a website, you put in, I want a Civic from this year, whatever, and you get kind of like asks back, and then you can bid on them, or like what, or you just shop through kind of all the dealerships' inventory in one place?
So we thought we were being tremendously innovative in that, and this was a new car focused experience. We thought we were being tremendously innovative in that you don't have to like look through a whole bunch of listings. You just configure the exact new car that you wanted. So back in 2011, maybe it would have been a 2012, Honda Civic, XE in this color, right, with this, options package. You configure that, select the local dealers in your area, and you would get offers back, firm final offers for either the exact car if they had it, or similar cars, maybe a different color. And you pulled out your credit card, you reserved it online, and whether you had selected a cash, finance, lease, whatever the terms, like those were the terms that you would be getting. And so you knew pricing transparency, you knew you were getting a fair deal because there was competition, and you basically completed the whole process largely online. Now that's where we actually started learning about dealership and customer behavior. Oftentimes the customer would go into the dealership and it's a sign the paperwork and pick up the keys kind of experience. So bulk of it completed online, buy online, pick up in store. That wasn't a really popular concept back then. But that's essentially what we saw happening. And in some cases, we saw dealers actually delivering cars to customers. And you got to remember, this was back in 2011, right? You see the ads about, all of the online car buying experiences now, where this has become much more commonplace. In 2011, it was a fairly pioneering concept.
And let me ask this, like starting off, you started from the consumer's perspective, you knew your own niche and probably just speaking and knowing a few other people that bought cars. How much did you know about dealerships and how dealerships worked and how they operated, what they cared about, what they didn't care about? Would you kind of go in blind, or did you do any sort of like, discovery, or did you have insight into that as well?
Did a ton of discovery. I think we thought we knew the market, really well. Right. And I think that's the inherent challenge oftentimes, where when you go talk to someone about, hey, like, this is my idea, right? What do you think? Oftentimes the answers naturally just bias towards the positive. When we got really into it operational is when we learned the nuances of what, really works and doesn't work. But we spent a ton of time talking to dealers. We spent a ton of time talking to, customers. I mean, it's no surprise. You go pick 10 random people in a parking lot, and you ask them, hey, do you like the car buying experience, right? Like 9 out of 10 of them will probably have some story about how they don't like the experience. It's just one of those cliches. When we talk to car dealers, naturally the first reaction is like, hey, anything that helps me sell more cars is, a good idea. So on the surface, we thought we deeply understood the space and, the problem set. But that was a lot of learning as we actually, built the company and had actually people use the product. That really, that's where the devil's in the details.
Well, then let's jump into that. Like, how did you think through building that marketplace? Which side did you? I assume you went after inventory first. How did you try to get that on?
I think that's the challenge that we learned very quickly of like a two-sided marketplace, right? And it's kind of funny or poetic in a way where the journey came full circle, and after we were acquired by the parent company to Autotrader. I spent a bit of time, at Autotrader working on the marketplace. And so, I saw a marketplace at big scale. But that was the inherent problem with the marketplace at the beginning, was creating this, two sides, matching the supply and the demand. And there's no easy answer for it. It was just tough. That was one of the biggest challenges for us. And I think, on reflection, part of the reason I think we were successful once we pivoted into a different model, a vertical SaaS model, was just knowing what we were built for, knowing what we were good at, and knowing where we could find opening in the market, if you will. One of the challenges with building a two-sided marketplace is creating the brand first and foremost, right? So getting customers to come to the marketplace, Unhaggle. And, listen, it's been well over a decade now, and like Unhaggle has like a pretty, a nice like cult following, in the car community now. But that didn't come overnight. And we realized very, very quickly that we were not capitalized to go out and spend, the big ad dollars to compete against Autotrader, to get, mind share of people that were thinking about buying cars, or to compete against the automakers themselves who were advertising to potential car buyers, or the dealers themselves. And so we weren't capitalized well for it. We realized we weren't built to build a big brand in that way. The dealer side was a little bit easier. That they at the end of the day, dealers just wanted to sell cars, but matching them at the same time was the problem. Because when there weren't enough customers, on there, you could have lots of dealers, but dealers would fall off when they didn't get a lot of immediate value.
How long, like between the time that you decided to start on Haggle until you decided the marketplace isn't the way to go, we're going to sell direct to dealerships? How much time are we talking about?
Yeah, it's probably, I'd say maybe like almost 3 years where we really focused hard on it. And like the problem sometimes is it wasn't like going terribly, in the sense that like, we were growing revenues and we were growing, month over month and year over year. It's just not exceptionally quickly, right?
Well, that's what I want to dive into, right? Because I think when we look back retrospectively and we summarize the history, it's easy to gloss over a 3-year period. 3 years, first of all, is a serious amount of time, but also not uncommon, especially when you had the reception you're talking about, which is not black or white. It's easy if you put it out and you just 2 months in, 3 months in, there's nothing happening. Nobody wants to sign on. You kill the thing, right? Through the roof, right? You're the next Uber. Amazing. But most of these startups fall in between. And so like, I want to dig into that a little bit more. What was that looking like? Which parts, as you go back and you think through those 3 years, were some of the things that were working and kept you going towards it, right? Like kept you in the marketplace frame of mind?
Yeah, I think, listen, at the end of the day, like we were making money, like we were generating revenue. We were, adding customers. We were even getting, decent press. And those were encouraging signs that kind of kept us going. But I think the realization was we tried all kinds of levers, right? To, accelerate growth.
What were some of those?
Everything from partnerships, to straight up, advertising. Like, we actually, ran a campaign on like radio for a while, right? Wow. Like we tried like traditional advertising, we tried digital advertising, we tried partnerships, we tried, we actually had a lot of good PR, and just like earned media. So it's not that we didn't, try a lot of different things. We did a lot of different things, but realized that, hey, the trajectory that we're on, like we could kind of keep going. But if we just kind of keep going on this trajectory, like we end up with like a lifestyle, type business. So we realized the Unhaggle business had a certain potential, and it wasn't necessarily bad. It's just not what we had set out to build as a company. We learned a lot in that the problem that we were solving is a real problem. Consumers want, greater transparency.
Was that the fundamental problem? Is just that consumers, as much as their problem wasn't solved, there was just so much ad spent on them in terms of car buying that it was just hard to kind of, the signal to noise was really weak and just hard to become top of mind? Or what would you say was the fundamental problem that didn't let it really, take off?
I think one, it was super hard to get mind share. I think two, keeping dealers engaged at scale was challenging, because like if you're not growing rapidly and like, you're just kind of this tiny little part of the dealer's business, you're not fundamental to the dealer's business. Like sometimes they'll pay attention, sometimes they won't. And so the two-sided marketplace was hard to kind of fully keep intact.
I guess that's like a liquidity problem. Is that how you would summarize that?
Yeah, there's a bit of a liquidity problem. And that just inherently goes back to, two-sided marketplaces. I have a ton of admiration and respect, for entrepreneurs and businesses that, are able to make it work. For us, it was just, headwind after headwind. But I think what we looked at was like, okay, it's a big market. There's a big problem here. If we solve the problem differently, can we create a much bigger business? Is there a much bigger opportunity that we can capture? And that's where the vision always stayed the same. It was about how do I make the car buying experience better, right? More transparent, faster, more convenient. That vision always stayed the same. It's just how we actually accomplish that vision evolved.
But let me ask this: you're building a second startup. I'm sure you don't want to spend 3 years on a go-to-market that you then realize is not the best go-to-market, right? What sort of signs might you look for now, and think about, somebody listening here who's like, early stage founder, maybe in this gray area, trying to figure out like, is this the thing, keep pushing, or like, this is not the thing, shift. What sort of early indicators would you look for, generally speaking, right? Not tied to auto specifically, generally speaking, that this might just be the wrong kind of go-to-market?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I think hindsight 2020, as I've been thinking about the next business, the way I'm assessing problems is kind of, I flipped it on its head. I don't start with the solution anymore and say, hey, Pablo, what do you think about, this solution that I'm working on and I'm building? Like, what do you think about it, right? Most of the time now it's actually, there may be a space or an industry or sector that I'm particularly interested in. I think I understand the problem, but where I start now is just understanding what the problem is. Like having the principal or the subject matter expert talk about what the problem is. Hey, if I built this really cool tool to help you buy a car, like, do you think you would use it? Right? Do you think it's a good idea? There's just a lot of inherent positive bias there. Going back to know what you are good at and what you are built for. I think, for us in hindsight, I now have a much greater appreciation for, if I'm going to build a marketplace that requires mass consumer adoption, to build that type of mind share, I'm going to need to be exceptionally well capitalized and be prepared to raise, a lot of capital. Those are all elements that I know, better the second time around. But I think, if I was more thoughtful about it, even the first time around, probably would have shortened that journey.
That resonates in two ways, actually. One of the things reminds me of when I was working at Gym Track, my last startup, which was effectively like a mini Magic Leap, right? Like, it was just a research shop because we were building hardware and AI and stuff, 10 years ago and all these sort of things. And I distinctly remember at one point, I was like, I'm a business type, and here I am running effectively like a research shop with like 30 some engineers. Like, I'm definitely like, I should be out doing sales and marketing. Like, I should be out doing BD, like these sort of things. Like, I'm not an engineer, and yet, so I'm not playing to my strengths at all. And that I'll never forget that, because I think that's a totally valid point. Is whatever go to market and startup you start, it needs to start from a problem. But at some point, you also need to think about, are you the right person for this, right? Because it's a competitive environment out there, and the right person is going to be working on this. And if they're stronger than you at the core things, they'll probably beat you. So that's the first part. The other thing is totally, one of the things we say all the time here is, before startup mode, there's research mode. And I think that's exactly what you're describing. It's easy to, I think it's super common with first time founders to start off with this, like, wouldn't it be cool if idea? Like, wouldn't it be cool if, in your case, you could just do this and that and get a car, right?
And that was how the light bulb came, right? I was buying a car. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could have just done, this? That's often a trap, I think.
I think so, because you end up starting with the solution first, as you said. Just naturally from there comes a solution, and then you try and fit that into a market. And it's not too bad if you're just solving it for yourself. Like, if you're a consumer and you assume there's many other consumers, maybe that's not too bad. But in your case, you have dealerships that are a huge part of it. And even on the consumer side, like, there's so much before that part of the funnel that you need to think through, right? And so I think starting with problems first, and I would assume if you had gone into dealerships and interviewed them high level around what problems they deal with on a day-to-day basis, you would probably find that this thing might be hard to make top of mind for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are other things as well. I mean, we spent a lot of time on this, but I'll give you one more. The pain point, really understanding the pain point that we're solving, as you said. So, buying a car, like, yeah, it's in many cases, it's a frustrating experience, but it's also one that happens every 4 6, 8 years for a consumer. And so, when you think about from a marketplace standpoint, for me as on Haggle, to actually have to find your attention at the right moment in time in that 4, 6, 8 year, time span where you're buying a car, and then actually convert you, properly. It just became an exceptionally expensive and difficult endeavor. It wasn't like a persistent problem that, I as a consumer face every single day. And so, it's something that I might always be interested in. And that was just another headwind. Not to say that, any startup founder should be, opportunities and ideas, for startups now. I look at it, through that different lens. I'm looking for tailwinds, over headwinds, right? And I'm looking at, deeply understanding a real acute problem, as opposed to, something that feels like it's a cool idea.
Makes sense. It actually reminds me, I always see these startups probably every few months or so trying to fix renting, right? Because inevitably some young person goes through this renting cycle. They're like, wow, renting really sucks. And it's one of these things. How often does it happen? Once every 3 years. What's the, status quo is like GG and Facebook Marketplace. It's not great, but it's also not that bad. And so it becomes a really, really hard problem to, 10x, have this 10x better solution and these sort of things. Anyway, so you start, you're kind of 3 years ish into this Unhaggle marketplace. It's going well, but not so well. How do you start? Like you ended up at vertical SaaS selling just to dealerships. How do you get there?
And automakers.
Dealerships and automakers. But do you start hearing things because you're working with them already? Are you hearing things from them that kind of inspire you towards this SaaS platform? Or how do you start to go and lean that way?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, the experience that we delivered, through Unhaggle, like we realize we are creating like real value here. And there's like a very positive customer experience. And in many cases, efficiency and, a positive experience on the dealership side as well. It's just, it was very difficult to get that, positive experience that happens one time or 10 times or 100 times and have it happen, 10 million times. So we knew we had something there. And really what we did was, okay, instead of trying to get all of the consumers to come to Unhaggle and experience this experience, and that experience being, hey, you get transparency online, in terms of pricing, and be able to complete much of the transaction before you even step foot into the store, right? Or ultimately even like buy online. We were early to that game, but we could see that like there was real customer delight when it actually happened. It just wasn't happening, at the volumes that we wanted to through the marketplace. And so we saw dealers using it. We saw consumers using it. We just decided like, hey, what if we actually just enabled the dealers and the automakers that, we had started working with to deliver that kind of experience to the audience that they already own, right? And that was the just very kind of small, it was almost like we had a solution, which was a easier buying experience enabled online and digital first, with transparency at the heart of it. We just kind of found a different delivery mechanism. It was almost like a shift in go to market, if you will. Instead of using a marketplace to go to market directly to the consumer and have a consumer led, we're, selling it to automakers and dealerships so that they can enable their version.
But to be clear, the idea actually came from inside your walls. In other words, the team thinking through what value it had created and how to deliver it versus, let's say, a dealership saying, hey, can I just like buy this platform, but I don't need your consumers. I just want to do it for mine. It was more the former.
We had moments where we're sitting around and we're like, okay, this is okay. Like we've got a business here. We're generating real revenues. We're growing, but like if we don't do something different, like we can kind of see the trajectory, right? And we really thought hard about, okay, like we're not going to walk away from this. As you said, it's like if it'd be easier if it was just a complete failure. It's like, but there was something here. And we really drilled down on like what's actually working. Like what are like the moments of delight where there's like magic happening almost, right? And how can we monetize that, as a business differently? Part of this is I'm a big believer that, having a customer pay for something is kind of like the ultimate, validation. The one step before that though is, you can't just go to a customer and say, hey, like, what do you like? Not to contradict what I said earlier about like really understanding, the problems, but in my experience, it isn't as simple as, hey, Mr. Customer, like, what problem do you have to solve? And let me try to just, do that, right? You do have to have a bit of a vision to start.
Once you had this new idea that, okay, maybe we just go direct to automakers and dealerships, how do you start like, I assume you didn't just go build the product and then try and sell. Like there's probably some kind of testing or some discovery type motion there. Like what did that look like?
Yeah, so for much of our history, we were bootstrapped, right? And so we didn't have a lot of luxury to go out there to build, massive products and see if they worked. I think that's one of the things that I loved a lot about B2B and enterprise is I could go and sit with a dealer or an automaker and talk to them about the vision of where we think the market is going, what customer experience should look like when it comes to buying a car, and solution with them that product before it is necessarily fully evolved and fully built out.
And so you had these conversations. How did those go? Like, did that kind of vision that you explained to them resonate, or with some of them at least? Like, what was like from 1 to 10 of wow, we've got the thing, or I don't think. Kind of where did that land?
So I think with some of them is the accurate characterization. I think we were still early in the space. I think this again. It's actually amazing looking in hindsight now. Today where we are, where a host of companies that are doing online car buying, and it's become much more ubiquitous in the space. But we were still early back then, right? Like this was like many of these conversations were happening in 2014, 2015. So it was some would be able to see the light and be interested in the vision. Now, not every single meeting would be like, oh, hey, yeah, let's go do this. Some of the meetings were like, hey, yeah, you know what? This is never going to happen. Other meetings are like, it's probably going to happen, but like, I'm hoping not anytime soon, so I'm not going to pay attention.
I think that makes sense. Like you had this vision, by the way, which is informed. It was informed from your own experience as a customer that the car buying experience had to improve relative to everything else you saw in other industries, and then reinforced, I think, through 3 years of being in this market and seeing that when the thing worked, it did provide a lot of value. And so that makes sense. Then it's a question of, okay, delivery and to who, right? Like who's on this kind of, in terms of this life cycle, who's on the early adopter side of this curve that is going to get it, is going to be all the kind of characteristics that early adopters tend to have. What did you do with them when you found them? Did you try to get them? You mentioned like paying, basically the only signature that matters is the one on a check, right? Like that's the ultimate form of validation. Did you try to get them to pre-buy it, or did you make them, you talked about design partners. What model did you use to kind of get them onto the next step?
So, ultimately the goal is to get a customer to actually pay for something, tangible. Like that's like the ultimate kind of measure in my mind of like, do you have something of real value or not? And listen, I think that might be biased, by my like B2B enterprise software experience. Okay, but I'm speaking in that lens, really only. So when we started working with some of these early automakers that became our design partners, one is finding just a small number that bought into our vision, that where we thought the market was going and where they should go. We worked together to come up with a solution. Like we hadn't built it yet, right? But we came up with a solution that like, hey, this suits your needs, is something that you would buy, and we've got clarity on what problem we're solving, how we're solving it, how we're going to integrate into different systems. So we really deeply understood with our design partners what it actually needed to be. It matched our overall vision, and so we believed that this thing actually should exist. In many of those cases, like we asked them to pay for it, and I think that really is ultimate validation on whether or not they really want it or not. But in many of those cases, our customers helped us finance our growth, where they paid for a solution that we designed together, and ultimately that solution became our product, and it scaled. So yes, like we're having deep customer conversations to help them shape and form ultimately what our product is, but it's our product because it aligns with our overall product vision and our vision on where the market is going.
On that custom software piece, like it's not uncommon on the B2B, especially like the bigger the customer, the more it's going to feel like custom software, as long as you're the one keeping the product and you have reason to believe that 80, 90%, let's say, of these features are going to be very relevant to kind of the next early adopters you're going to sell to. You look at the early days of Athenian, you look at the early days of StackAdapt, right, which now is doing like $100 million plus in revenue. And it was effectively custom software. I mean, it was a design partner, and you're building what that design partner believes they need. And there's guardrails, but yeah, I think it's a pretty common story. Let me ask you one thing around getting them to pay. I'm always curious on the strategies used here. What, like, because one of the things that I think founders always run into in this case is like, okay, yeah, they really want it, but they're like, we'll pay when it's ready. And like, what's in it for them to pay early? Did you have to use any strategies to convince them to pay ahead of it? Or what did you think incentivized them to get in early, so to speak?
Part of it is actually just having the boldness to ask, right? I think there's almost this like hesitancy to ask, like, that kind of goes to sales basically. You have to ask for the sale. That has to be anchored with the confidence that like we'll be able to deliver it, and that it is something that the customer, deeply wants. It goes hand in hand. Like, if they don't really want to pay for it, like, you have to really ask yourself, like, how big of an opportunity am I creating for them, or a problem that I'm solving for them? Like, it could either be an opportunity or a problem. You're either solving a problem or opening up an opportunity. I think there's a hesitancy to ask. Make the ask. Be confident in your ability to deliver it, and if it's a no, then I think there's serious reflection to be done there. Oftentimes, it's less about the initial idea. As long as you're in a space where there is going to be a change in your direction, and you have a big macro problem to solve, how you exactly go about it almost matters less. It's just about constantly putting one foot in front of the other, and reflecting and adjusting and reflecting and adjusting. So I don't regret the unhaggled journey whatsoever. We wouldn't have gotten to MotoInsight if we didn't do the unhaggled journey.
That's completely true. I mean, we summarize that by you have to be in the market to win the market. And the reality is you can do all the customer discovery you want to do, and you should, because you're going to discover problems that are worth solving. You're going to waste, let's say, less time. But at some point, you're going to have to get in the market. And frankly, the unique insights that are going to lead to the actual final solution that truly gets product market fit, they can't be found without being in the market in the first place. So I totally buy that. The other thing I'll point out actually is to your point around, you have to have the confidence to ask, like, otherwise, they're not going to pay. That's one of the things that's also, I think, a little bit paradoxical, which is, in a sense, it becomes a bit of an advantage, I think, to be bootstrapped, because constraints set you free. The fact of the matter is, you don't have the luxury to say, well, they're not buying, but it's because of blah, blah, blah. So let's just go build it, and then they will buy it, right? It's like, if they're not paying, I'm not building. Pretty simple. And it actually is powerful, because, again, it sets you free to only build stuff that clearly does have value and is validated through signatures on a check. So let me maybe like fast forward a little bit. Like, you going through this, you've kind of moved into this pivot. Describe to me, like, if you think about the first 6 months or so of the marketplace, right, of Unhaggle, which ultimately got traction, but not like true, clear product market fit, versus those first 6 months, and I'm using 6 months, could be 3, could be 9, whatever, like early days of the B2B SaaS, which is the MotoInsight product that ultimately really did get real product market fit, real traction. What are some of the notable differences? Like, what are some of the things you start to see, like, whoa, this is a different world, sort of thing?
There's definitely a vibe difference that you can feel. Like, when it's working, you feel it, right? That entire 3 years, like, every single like step was like a grind. And this is not to say that building a company isn't like it is easy, but it felt like we were fighting battles every single day, left, right, and center, and like the wins were just like so micro, right? Whereas on the software side, the wins were just way more tangible. Like, we get a new logo, like, we get, a big check, like, and that it felt like a different kind of, momentum for sure. So there's the vibe aspect to it. I think, more practically, I think it just, you start seeing more opportunities than challenges. Like, in the marketplace days, especially in the early days, it's just, it felt like we saw way more challenges than opportunities, where in when we were doing Moto Commerce, which was our SaaS platform at MotoInsight, just opportunities like were far more in abundance. And it's simply maybe like as tactical as like, okay, well, I made one sale and I have a list of other similar customers that I can call. And so like I've got actionable tactical like, hey, like I know exactly what to do. The next step always felt way more clear when we were doing vertical SaaS and deep into MotoInsight versus like when we were in the early marketplace where like we had this really big grand idea, but like how to actually like put it into action was a lot of like feeling around.
It's funny you describe it in these kind of nebulous terms because I think that's just much closer to what reality is. Like the reality is 0 to 1 is always and has been, will be more art than science. Everybody wants a playbook. Everybody wants clear things to do or not to do, and they just don't exist. And so, it's kind of the picture I get when you're talking about it is kind of like the difference between pushing a rock up a hill, right? Classic, like, if you work at it, you will make progress, but it's always like you feel like if you just happen to sleep for one day too much, it just kind of comes right back down versus running down that hill, which, hey, you're going to trip up. It's not necessarily easy. You can't just not do anything. You got to go. But there's kind of this momentum, right? That keeps you, going down as time progresses sort of thing. And yeah, it's hard to get more clear than that. So look, I think that really wraps it up, right? I mean, we've gone through the evolution, the struggles at the beginning, which I think are the important piece because as a founder, the hardest part of pivoting, frankly, is realizing that you need to pivot in the first place. Like that's the piece that I think founders struggle with most is, do I go another quarter? Because by the way, like not giving up, right? That's the key. It's like you can't give up. And so sometimes you confuse that with not giving up means, oh, if it's hard, it's supposed to be hard and we just got to keep going. And there's some truth to that because like if you give up too easily on a go-to-market or a certain delivery, you're never going to see, the other side. You're never going to get to success, right? At the same time, you've always got, every quarter or so, you do have to think about, am I pushing a boulder up a hill, right? And is there some other way to shift things around as you did, shift the go-to-market around to get a little bit more tailwind, a little bit more momentum? Let me ask two questions that we always end with. First one, and we kind of alluded to this, but maybe you had a bit more time to think about it as we chatted, which is, when was the first time that you felt like you had true product market fit?
The memory that comes to mind was like I was at my desk at this like dingy office that we had rented, and got a call back, one of the automakers that we had been pitching, and I can't remember if this was like maybe like the third one. Basically, it was like, hey, yeah, like we're in, right? I got the call back that like, hey, like we want to do this, right? And there's still some details that had to be ironed out. It's kind of like one, maybe it's luck, right? If you can get some, one customer, like maybe it's luck. You get two, it's like like, and then you get three, it's like that's it. That's the pattern now, right? I remember the moment getting that call, and like it was like one of those entrepreneurial moments that like I live for. I don't know if you golf, but it's kind of like one of those things where like, when like you hit like that one perfect shot, it keeps you coming back for more. Like though that's the mountaintop, for me, as a founder, as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, where like we felt breakthrough, or like I felt breakthrough in that moment, where I knew we were doing something valuable because like a third customer, like major customer, just decided to like send me a lot of money for a solution that we're delivering, and like we knew we were on the right track at that point.
I love that. I mean, being a founder fundamentally is all about turning an idea to reality, and that happens once customers buy and adopt the product. So like the feeling you get when that happens is irreplaceable. Last question is, if you could go back and kind of, maybe you're doing this because you're starting a second one, but if you could go back to the early days, right? Like taking everything you know now, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself, right? 11, 12 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier. I'll expand on it. I think it's like know what you are good at and what you are built for, right? Like as I think as you mentioned, as I think about what's next and explore like all kinds of different ideas and opportunities. Like there's like really cool stuff out there that like I'm like, oh man, wouldn't it be interesting to do that, or that seems like such a really cool idea, right? Like really understanding what my strengths are, right, as an entrepreneur. Sometimes you got to build the business that I think you said it well earlier, that fits you, that there's founder fit for. I think we learned that in hindsight in the earlier part of our journey. You have to deeply have conviction about where a market is going, and I think that was one thing that held true through our entire journey. Like we knew that the car buying experience was broken. We knew that it needed to be better, and it would be better. And we knew that technology was going to modernize a lot of it. And a decade later, like that all played true, right? How we actually created value in solving that evolved over time. But if we got anything right, was like we picked a market that we had deep conviction on, that it was going to go a certain direction, and we stayed. You have to. What was that saying that you had? You have to be in market.
You have to be in the market to win the market. Yes.
You have to be in the market to win the market, right? So we got that part right. We picked a space that we knew it was going to go in a certain direction. How we went about it, at the beginning, you could say like maybe we picked wrong, right? Maybe if we were better at sussing out that early concept, we may have done things differently. I don't really like regret any of it, as I said, because it led to the right place. But we were right in the market. We were persistent in staying in that market, persistent in staying in that market, but not ignorant to signs when it wasn't working, right? Or wasn't, growing to the potential that we thought we could capture. So I'd say, yeah, like know what you're good at and what you're built for, and pick a market and a company and an approach that fits that. And then to have deep conviction about where a space is going, and get in that space and stay in that space.